As we prepare for training camps to open in a little over a month in the NBA, there are still two players that their pending trades or requested trades could drastically change the outlook of the NBA season before it even gets started. And I'm talking about Dame Lillard and James Harden. On today's episode, we're going to talk about and ask the question, which player is most likely to be moved first and will either be moved before the start of the NBA season? We're going to get into all that and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything NBA and basketball related. I'm the host here, Haize, holding it down for the team today, but let's go ahead and get into the content, right? So I want to talk today about Dame Lillard and James Harden, both players sitting in much different scenarios and situations, but both kind of waiting for a trade and trades that could change the outlook of in either conference depending on where they end up going. Now, they sit in very different scenarios and situations, and I think before we talk about them, we have to talk about how the player empowerment movement, which is recent in the NBA, we've seen ownership, GMs now fight against that, right? When you look at the number of players that within the first year, even before a new contract starts with them after they just signed and inked new deals, kick in, we had players that requested trades, most recently being Kevin Durant around this time last season. And the Brooklyn Nets kind of set a precipice in a way in not moving Kevin Durant when he asked to be traded, right? They decided to go ahead, stick it out with him and Kyrie. They then ended up moving them before the trade deadline, changing the outlook of that team, getting a probably way more back than what they would have initially done had they just went ahead and moved him. And so now we're seeing this new kind of standard set, right? Where teams are kind of, fighting against it, right? So that they can maintain and get the best trade packages possible, right? And not really jump to move, where they are just taking any deal to kind of move off a player. And that is kind of new in the NBA. Typically, when a player asks for a trade, especially if it's before the season, a lot of teams like to get it done so they don't have distractions in training camp, which a player like James Harden especially is probably going to be a distraction in training camp intentionally as he looks to move out of there. But when you look at the teams that are now, like Dame Lillard, for example, who probably should have asked for a trade years ago, didn't do it, decided to stick it out with his team, was loyal there, and then they came to a crossroads this season, a crossroads that almost everybody else understood and knew was coming, is that are you going to draft? Are you going to take this player? Are you going to move it and try to build a team around me? That's from the perspective of Dame. They decided to go ahead and do the right thing, in my estimation, hold on to their draft pick, go ahead and draft a player that is probably going to be a huge part of their franchise going forward. And maybe they got their next franchise point guard already while waiting on the next one to be moved. The only other time that I could think of a scenario like that is with John Wall and Gilbert Arenas with the Washington Wizards, who Gilbert was still there initially when John Wall was traded. Now they eventually moved him, I believe it was to the Orlando Magic is where they eventually moved him to, but they had their new starting point guard there when it was clear that it meant a changing of the direction of that team, right? And so Dame, who now, seen it and said that he didn't want any more young players and talented 19-year-olds and things like that, they got one. And Scoot Henderson is there now, right? And so he ends up requesting a trade. I know he posted something on Instagram that got everybody, kind of re-talking about him potentially being traded, but the Portland Trailblazers seem content to wait it out, right? And they will move forward with the new direction of their franchise while their former franchise player and Dame Lillard is there until they get a deal that they feel is right and they feel is worth them moving off from Dame Lillard. Now, they're not going to get equal value, right? We all know that. I think everybody expects that they are not going to get another franchise caliber player back for Dame Lillard. What they're probably looking for is first picks, especially when you look at the Miami Heat. If they can get some future pick swaps out there, they can push those pick swaps out to where Dame and Jimmy Butler could be gone off that roster by then, and then you have the potential to then have the rights to swap picks with a team that may be even worse than you as you look at Scoot Henderson, Shaedon Sharpe, and the other young players that they have there maybe being on their ascension by then, right? And then you can add cheap quality talent and really hopefully build a team, especially that would be smart for a team like Portland that has never been and probably never will be unless things drastically change, a free agent destination, right? And so when you look at the Dame Lillard situation, it's one that everybody kind of figured was coming. But unfortunately, it is what it is, right? And so when it comes down to it, Dame is going to be moved. It's just, does Miami finally, put all the chips on the table, which they offered a deal that I thought was probably the best that they can offer. But then when you start getting into the point of future pick swaps, it changes things, especially like I just said, from the perspective that the Blazers are in, is that if you can push that out, right? You're talking about if you can push out a pick swap out to 2026, 2028, whatever it is, at that point in time, Shaedon, Scoot could be on a hell of an ascension, especially like if they do get Nikola Jovic back in a trade as well. Those players could be rocking and rolling and ready to go and at the place where you're ready to really start making a move for it, right? And so that's where it comes down to Dame. I think the Dame thing, I think that they're going to be content to let that ride out. I don't know if that's going to happen by the start of the season. I personally think that the Dame trade, Miami could probably get that done now if they just go to switching and offering that. Now, Pat Riley, super intelligent, one of the best GMs in football, and he is going to want to make sure that he's doing everything that he can to maintain future assets, because he realizes if you add Dame Lillard to Jimmy Butler, yeah, that's a solid team. Do not get me wrong, and that is a team that I would love to see in the East, and Bam with that as well. That is a core that you can then ride out and you can expect to go far, right? Not necessarily saying that they're going to be a championship contender. You got to see how they're going to flesh out the rest of that bench, but they could do some really interesting things. Now, when it gets to James Harden in a much different scenario, the NBA has officially opened up their investigation into the scenario when it comes down to James Harden saying he was promised things. It came out today that James Harden, in being interviewed by the NBA, said that he was more so talking about promising being moved quickly after he requested his initial trade. But when it comes down to James Harden, that is a very different scenario. Daryl Morey, I think, is really prepared to just say, hey, man, listen, we'll send you home. Because if James Harden, who is threatened not to show up to training camp, does not, the Philadelphia 76ers can re-up his deal, and he'll have to deal with this a whole nother year, considering it's in the last year of his contract. And by the way, do not be surprised if a provision much more like that kicks in when it comes to players requesting trades or something like that close to the start of a deal. Something's going to happen. The NBA is going to do something. The next CBA is not to about 7 years out, 5 at the minimum. So we don't expect it anytime soon. But when it comes down to it, the situation with the Philadelphia 76ers is a little bit more tricky, just in the sense that I think Morey is a little bit more stubborn, right? Whereas the Portland Trailblazers are fine. Like, listen, Dame, you're going to come in. We got our young players. They're going to play. It is what it is. We got our new head coach, stuff like that. The Philadelphia 76ers are a team that needs to keep Joel Embiid happy and probably wants to put the best team around him so they can try to make their move. But while they're playing hardball with Harden now, I expect the deal to get done with them. It may go towards to the beginning of the season. The Philadelphia 76ers may be in a great position as well to just kind of wait it out, see a team maybe get off to a disappointing start, maybe a team that thought, hey, maybe we could trade for Dame, and then maybe say, hey, let's pivot. Let's try to get James Harden, right? So there's some scenarios like that. A player can get injured, something can happen, or you could even see a team that is better off to start the season, and then they say, hey, we can make an acquisition here and go even further, right? But James Harden, who's a player that, unlike Dame, who's been a consummate professional, yes, he requested a trade, but he's been extremely loyal to that team. James Harden has been a prima donna, and really the last 5 years of James Harden's career has been an absolute shit show. Just to be 100% honest, it's been shitty, right? And all because of James Harden's own doing, right? You force your way out of Houston, right, in the fat suit or whatever that ended up being. You then go to the team that wanted you with players that wanted you there, and you that ends up falling apart. You request another trade. The fact of the matter is that James Harden, being 33 years old, turns 36 in about 5 days. I'm sorry, 36. How you go from 33 to 36? He turns 34 years old in about 5 days. And so he has to make that decision soon, right? This may be James Harden's last chance to get in and show himself that he can be a productive member and not be as much of the prima donna as we've seen from him recently. But it's up to him to do that, right? When you look on James Harden, this is going to be James Harden's fourth team since the start of the 2020 season. Fourth team since the start of the 2020 season if he is moved on this deal. James Harden, who is one of a hugely productive regular season player, has had some really signs of concern in the playoffs and things like that, but he can help a team. And maybe with a team that already has some structure, maybe even help that team get over their next hump. But the questions around James Harden, the character concerns, there are some teams that just don't, and franchises that just do not want to deal with the head case or risk moving assets for a player that can be a free agent next season. It's been a head case, and who's to say that even if you do work in an extension as part of the trade, that he's not going to ask for a trade in a year and you just gave up assets for James Harden, which is the scenario and situations that the Philadelphia 76ers find themselves in. When it comes down to James Harden, it's a little bit more of a difficult scenario. I do think that with the 76ers being more motivated to get a deal done because of where that team could possibly go for the right move, may look to do it. But it's not guaranteed either, especially with a player like James Harden. And so, in asking that question, I know it's a long way to go about it. I want to present it to you guys. Who do you think is moved first, Dame or James Harden? I kind of have my money on Dame. I think the James Harden deal could go through as well because they could look to just get rid of the headache and get whatever they can back. But considering they are trying to keep Joel Embiid happy, and that would be the worst case scenario. If you do something, make a move, and Joel Embiid finally looks at the Philadelphia 76ers and says, listen, I'm done with this shit show. I'm up out of here. Maury, thank you for what you've tried to do. But listen, I got to go somewhere to a franchise that I think is going to be competent and maybe already has one, if not two pieces already there, and try to join that team and link up and finally make it to a goddamn NBA Finals and hopefully get my ring. I got my MVP. The ring is next, right? And so I don't know if that – I'm not going to put like a percentage chance on either one, but these are two trades that really do have the chance to change the outlook of either conference that they go to. And because of that, it's one of the more interesting scenarios still left out there. Yeah, the Christian Wood still being unsigned, the Kelly Oubre Jr., PJ Washington, all that stuff it's hugely interesting as well. And I'll probably talk about that on tomorrow's video. But overall, these situations with Dame and James are just wild, and they suck. And it's just crazy to see two players, one that's been a consummate professional in Dame Lillard, and one that's been a head case in Kimbo Wedge, James Harden. But how those stories end up ending, I guess we'll see. Make sure you guys are following the show at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, NBA Central Pod at gmail.com or NBA Central Show at gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything basketball related. And like I like to end every episode on, I'll see you guys tomorrow or the next time I feel like making a video. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.